The gambling hall was nearly deserted. That day in Aix, the theater of a new casino was presenting a comedy by Henri Milehack for the first time. Nevertheless, around the 4 gaming tables on either side of the croupiers, the usual circle had already clustered, men and women, standing or seated, the indefatigable regulars of the roulette wheel. In the rest of the room, a hushed silence reigned. The long divans pushed against the walls stood empty, as did the low armchairs in the corners, and the chairs with their leather upholstery faded with time. The first salon was also empty. There, pacing steadily back and forth with his hands behind his back, was an attendant with a ceremonial chain on his chest. The very same perceptive guardian whose duty it was to identify suspicious individuals attempting to penetrate the gaming rooms without an introduction from the administration, which vouched for the respectability of its patrons. From all sides came a soft but continuous chiming of coins. It was the golden stream, a stream of Louis d'Or, ringing out as it scattered across the 4 tables, drowning out the still restrained, quiet, and calm human voices. In the doorway of the hall appeared the tall figure of a slender and still rather young man. He carried himself with that ease characteristic of people whose youth was spent in the elegant and wealthy circles of Parisian society. His head was already somewhat bald on top, yet the remaining light brown hair curled softly at his temples, and above his lip, handsome mustaches with curled and swept in an elegant arc. In his light blue, amiable eyes flickered a hint of mockery, while his bold, courteous, and yet elegantly haughty bearing indicated that he was neither an upstart who had recently wormed his way into society, nor one of those suspicious casino habitués who roam the world in pursuit of easy gain. At the very moment he went to push aside the heavy portiere over the entrance, the attendant approached him. "Would you be so good as to remind me of your name, sir?" he inquired respectfully. "Robert Mariolle," the newcomer replied without delay. "I registered this morning." "Thank you, sir." Mariolle crossed the threshold of the hall, sweeping his gaze over those present. A voice called out to him, and a short, portly man of about 40, impeccably dressed, came towards him with outstretched arms. He was wearing what is called a smoking jacket, a strange style of coat brought into fashion by a certain pleasure-loving prince and resembling a young man's attire on his first communion day. Mariolle took his hands, shook them, and said with a smile, "Hello, my dear Lucy." The Comte de Lucery, a good-natured, wealthy, and carefree bachelor, day after day and year after year went to the same places as everyone in his circle, did the same things as everyone, said the same things as everyone, and thanks to his inoffensive disposition, was a welcome guest in the finest salons. "Well, how is the heart?" he asked Mariolle with marked interest. "Oh, splendid, it's all behind me." "Completely?" "Absolutely. So you've come to Aix to complete your convalescence?" "Precisely. I need to breathe a different air." A wise observation. The air one breathed while in love can always retain dangerous microbes of a past passion. "Not at all, my dear fellow. There is not the slightest danger anymore. But I lived with her for 3 years. One must change one's habits, and there's nothing better than travel for that." "You arrived this morning?" "Yes." "And you'll stay for some time?" "Until I grow bored." "Oh, you won't be bored here. It's quite amusing, very amusing indeed." And Lucery began to paint a vivid picture of life in Aix for him. He outlined this town, a town of medicinal baths and casinos, of medicine and amusement, a town where, having gathered from all corners of the globe, monarchs who had lost their thrones and dubious rich men who had managed to avoid prison coexisted peacefully. With his characteristic humor, he described the unique mingling of ladies of high society and denizens of the demi-monde, both dining at adjacent tables, gossiping loudly about one another, and an hour later, playing at the same gaming table. He wittily depicted the suspiciously familiar relations, the incomprehensible benevolence of people usually quite unapproachable, who, having resolved to amuse themselves in this Savoyard town, cast aside all fastidiousness in their acquaintances. Monarchs, future or already deposed, their highnesses, princes, great and small, uncles, cousins, brothers-in-law, or kinsmen of kings, high-ranking representatives of French and international aristocracy, who in every way emphasize the unbridgeable chasm separating them from the ordinary bourgeoisie, and who in winter, in Cannes, formed closed, impenetrable aristocratic circles accessible only through English hypocrisy or the vast fortunes of American and Jewish millionaires, all of them, with the onset of the summer heat, flocked to the noisy casinos of Aix, as if possessed by a single desire to unbend a little, having cast aside excessive scruples in their interactions. Count de Lucoury delivered his account in the cheerful, slightly disdainful tone of a perfectly well-bred man of the world. He spoke as if introducing a friend to some peculiar establishment where he himself felt completely at home, laughing in equal measure at others and at himself, and he liberally laid on the colors for greater effect. His small, full, and clean-shaven face was framed by side whiskers trimmed level with his ears, which made it appear even rounder. With that animated, slightly affected mimicry characteristic of salon wits, the Count lavishly scattered facts, mentioned women's names, and good-naturedly recounted spicy stories, be they of amorous adventures or gambling misadventures. Mariolle listened to him with a smile, occasionally nodding in approval, as if deriving pleasure from this frivolous yet undoubtedly rehearsed monologue. However, a different story could be read in his blue eyes, clouded by some persistent, sorrowful thought he was vainly trying to dismiss. When his interlocutor fell silent, a pause ensued. "And do you know the latest nasty trick she played on me?" asked Mariolle, seeming to have forgotten all about Aix, and everyone Lucoury had just been holding forth about. "What nasty trick? Who?" the other asked, surprised. "Henriette." "Ah, your former mistress." "Yes." "No, haven't heard." "Do tell." "She begged me to lend money to a second-hand clothes dealer, and then used the woman's apartment for her own assignations." Lucoury burst out laughing. The trick seemed delightful to him. "Yes," Mariolle continued, "she put on such a touching performance, passing that procuress off as her cousin. She concocted a whole story about a seduction, a forsaken child left in the care of the poor relative. In short, a complete novel, the stupidest novel only a woman of her sort, a true daughter of a concierge, could have invented." Luckie didn't stop laughing. "And you fell for it?" "I confess I did. Astounding. A man like you, who grew up on the knees of your father Mariolle, the shrewdest of mortals." Mariolle gave a slight shrug with the air of a man filled with contempt, perhaps for himself, perhaps for everyone else. In matters where women are involved, the most perceptive minds turn into fools, he said, more to himself. "My dear fellow, when they are loved, they often turn out to be wretched creatures. That is, perhaps, putting it too strongly. Not in the least. But when they themselves love, they are angels. True, angels armed with claws, sulfuric acid, and anonymous letters. Sometimes rather clinging angels, but angels nonetheless. in their fidelity, self-sacrifice, devotion. However, this whole affair seems to have shaken you up considerably, though your Henriette, it appears, was not among the constant ones. Yes, but it was precisely her infidelities that brought about my cure. Now I am free of her. Finally. 3 times, that's simply too much. So you mean you caught her being unfaithful for the 3rd time? Yes. When you wrote to me the day before yesterday, asking me to rent a room, had you just exposed her? Yes. So you found out about her betrayal only very recently? Well, yes. 4 days ago. Good heavens. Be careful, lest your illness return to you. Oh no, I answer for myself. And Mariolle, to unburden his soul, laid out the entire history of his affair for Lucari, as if striving to cast out from his memory and heart everything that tormented him. All the events, all the details. His father, having been a deputy, then a minister, and finally the head of a major political financial bank, the Industrial Cities Union, had managed to amass a considerable fortune in this last post. To his only son he left an income of over 500,000 francs a year and bequeathed him to live in idleness, despising one and all. An old, hardened wheeler dealer and a convinced skeptic, he had early on opened his heir's eyes to all manner of human trickery. Brought up under his guidance and initiated into the secrets of the manipulations of the powerful, Robert had become one of those young men of fashion for whom, by the age of 30, it seems there is nothing left in life left to explore. He was endowed with a subtle intellect and a mocking perceptiveness, honed by the innate straightforwardness of his nature. He drifted with the current, avoiding undue care and accepting with relish every pleasure that came his way. Having no family, his mother had died shortly after his birth, and knowing neither ardent passions nor all-consuming enthusiasms, he had long felt no particular inclination for anything. He was drawn only to society functions, his club, the innumerable amusements of Paris, and also to a newly awakened interest in painting and other objets d'art. This interest had first arisen under the influence of a friend who was a collector, and he himself was instinctively drawn to rare and elegant things. Then came the need to furnish a handsome new house he had bought on the Rue de Montaigne. And finally, simply because he had nothing else to do. Having devoted considerable time and no small sum to this pursuit, he became one of those known as enlightened connoisseurs, the sort who are considered experts by virtue of their wealth, and who create fashion for artists by paying them lavishly. Like so many others, after acquiring a multitude of canvases and costly trinkets, he earned a right to his own judgment in matters of art. His opinion was sought and respected. By encouraging fashionable trends while being incapable of recognizing true talent, he became one of those responsible for the annual inundation of the paletot industry with mere artisan daubings, awarded medals only to subsequently flood the galleries of dilettante collectors. He soon grew cool towards art, having convinced himself that here, as everywhere, universal delusion reigned, that no true experts existed, and that artistic tastes changed with the fashions, just like the cut of a dress. He grew increasingly indifferent and skeptical. A true Parisian who had reached the age of 35, the point at which a bachelor is considered almost old, he confined himself to the round of pleasures habitual for men of his years. He organized his life with calculation, navigating it with clear-eyed precision, soberly allotting a place to each diversion, gambling, the races, social engagements, and so forth. He took pleasure in society, dined out willingly, and spent his evenings, from 10 until 1, in select salons where he felt at home. Everywhere he was received with eagerness. His arrival was met with delight, and people curried favor with him, for he was rich, witty, and likable. Being a true Frenchman, a representative of that old stock renowned for its courtesy and mockery, which scorns everything that does not concern it and remains ignorant of all that does not seem amusing, Mariolle was of the opinion that life, in the final analysis, was not worth much trouble, and that it was far better to laugh over it than to shed tears. It was at a dinner party that he was introduced to his friend's mistress. The woman immediately captivated Mariolle with her peculiar, intimate charm, unassuming yet palpable. Seated beside her at the table, one hardly noticed her at first, yet within an hour of conversation, one found oneself under the spell of her quiet allure. She was an elegant, slender woman with a subdued, soft-featured appearance, reserved, with gentle and modest manners. In the elevated demi-monde circle she frequented, she played the part of an unassuming salon hostess. Almost unknown among the brilliant cohort of capital courtesans, she was invariably the officially acknowledged mistress of someone, remaining in the shadows, luxurious and fragrant. Deft and calculating, she belonged to that class of women who know how to fill a wealthy bachelor-rake's life with cozy comforts, and, until she met a naive admirer doomed to marry her, maintained her particular specialty, selling wealthy, idle men the illusion of a domestic hearth for a high price. Robert Mariolle became enamored of her, began to court her as if she were a society lady, dared to confess his feelings, and wrote to her of his love. Aware of his wealth, she did not yield immediately, but eventually gave in to his persistence, casting their liaison in the form of pseudo-adultery, much as her relationship with her previous protector had mimicked a marital union. Once assured she had secured Mariolle's attachment, she was suddenly seized by pangs of conscience. She declared to him that she must choose between them. If Mariolle wished it, she would stay with him. He was delighted by her decision and replied that he accepted her proposal. Thereupon, she very skillfully, without scandal or quarrels, broke with the man who had been funding her cozy favors. Her life remained as tranquil as before. Even the two rivals maintained cordial relations. True, for a few weeks they coldly avoided each other, but one day exchanged a handshake and became companions again. From then on, Mariolle lived between two homes. One housed his paintings, rare furniture, bronzes, and thousands of costly trinkets. The other held a beautiful woman, always ready to receive him, to greet him with a smile, words of love, and caresses. It was this second home that he grew to love, becoming a haven for his idleness, and gradually he transferred his entire life there. He grew accustomed to dining there, first occasionally, then more often, and finally every evening. He received friends there, occasionally held parties where his mistress played the hostess with a quiet grace that filled Mariolle with pride. Beside her, he savored a rare delight, the possession of something like a slave who served him with her love, a charming, obedient, devoted slave whom he paid. She played the part of the make-believe wife to perfection, and Mariolle grew so attached to her and was so happy that only by catching her unawares, completely unexpectedly, was he able to believe in her infidelity. A duel followed. Mariolle was lightly wounded and returned to his former life. After 2 months, which seemed interminable to him, he chanced to meet Henriette one morning on the street. She approached him, blushing with a mix of timidity and her own audacity. "I love you," she said. "If I was unfaithful to you, it's only because I'm a loose woman. But you knew that already. What I mean is, it was a passing fancy. Who doesn't have them? Were you always faithful to me when I was your mistress? Did you never once have a rendezvous with some former flame? Admit it. No, say nothing. After all, you paid me, and that's a different matter entirely. Their confrontation lasted 2 hours. They walked back and forth along the pavement, moving from one street to another. Mariolle spoke harshly, angrily, passionately. She, meanwhile, seemed to shrink into herself, humble, touching. She wept, paying no heed to passers-by, not wiping her tears. She wept sincerely. In her own way, this courtesan loved him. Mariolle, moved, began to console her, called on her the next day, and she became his mistress once more. Bah, he said, seeking to justify himself in his own eyes. After all, she's just my kept woman. However, he somewhat altered his mode of life, receiving only a few chosen friends in his second apartment, among them the Count de Maupassant, and began to live a more secluded and retired life with his mistress. And then she finally conquered him completely with her charms, her sweet attentiveness, her sly, lively wit, which she seemed to reserve for him alone, even by reading aloud to him. In the evenings when they were alone, she would read. Little by little, the hours spent alone with her began to seem more agreeable to him than almost all his former diversions. But one morning, a letter intercepted from her maid revealed to him the name of a new rival. He deemed it naive and ridiculous to fight a second duel over this one woman and simply cast her off. But for 2 years he had lived in constant intimacy with that luxurious body. He languished for his established habits, for her particular kisses, which he could neither forget nor replace with the caresses of other women. And for 3 months his nights were restless, and his days fraught with anxiety. She sent him a letter. He left it unanswered. A second letter agitated him. She repented of her guilt, citing extenuating circumstances, and begged him, as a favor, to visit her occasionally, if only as a friend. After a month and a half of resistance, he finally yielded to her pleas. A few days later, they were reunited. Thus another year slipped by. Then an old woman, a second-hand clothes dealer to whom he had several times given money at Henriette's request, came to see Mariolle. The women had quarreled, and the old procuress came to Mariolle with the sole aim of revenge, to reveal that Henriette had been using her house for secret assignations. This time, Mariolle's indignation was final. His fury was so great that he felt himself cured, as if the wound in his heart had scarred over instantly. He resolved henceforth to have with women only the calculating relations of a master who pays and binds himself to nothing. Wishing to change both scene and lifestyle, he left Paris. He chose Aix because his friend the Count de Maupassant was there, and upon meeting him, promptly recounted this sordid history, though the Count already knew it almost in its entirety from fragments. Yet he listened to Mariolle to the end with a touch of mocking curiosity. Then, looking him straight in the eye, he asked, "And how long before you take her back?" "Oh, never. You'd do better to stay silent." "Never. Jester, you've been here only half an hour, and you speak of nothing but her." "Forgive me. I speak of myself, as everyone does." "Yes, but in connection with her. Just as if I were telling you about a trip to China or Japan. It doesn't mean I intend to return there. It means you're thinking of her." "Oh, only in the evenings." "Uh-huh. The most dangerous time. Whereas in the morning, upon waking, I am delighted, absolutely delighted, to be rid of her. Throughout the entire day, I don't recall her once, as if she never existed. It's true, with the coming of dusk, certain intimate memories surface, and one feels a little sad. But I despise her so thoroughly that everything between us is finished. Their attention was drawn by a crowd pouring into the hall. The performance was over. The spectators, accustomed to early bedtimes, dispersed to their hotels and villas, while those who kept late hours headed for the gaming rooms. One after another, cocottes appeared, regulars of the beaches and casinos, from Biarritz, Dieppe, Monte Carlo, legendary huntresses of fortunate gamblers, the Delabarbe sisters, Rosalie Durand, the tall Marie Bonnefoy, in hunting costumes and hats that towered over the heads of the crowd like beacons. Around them clustered men, tall and short, stout and thin, each adorned in that same absurd garment allegedly invented by the heir to the English throne. Ladies of high society also appeared in the hall, representatives of the upper crust and its select circles, accompanied by retinues of gentlemen. The Princess de Guerche, the Marquise d'Epelady, Lady Wormsley, an English beauty, one of the favorite companions of the Prince of Wales, that connoisseur of women, and her rival, the fair-haired American, Mrs. Fields. And at once, despite the swelling murmur of footsteps and voices, the clinking of gold on the tables grew so loud that its clear, continuous metallic ring began to drown out the noise of the crowd. Mariolle watched the new arrivals, recognized familiar faces, and, laying claim to the role of a connoisseur of female beauty, entered into debates with Lucerie, the kind all men of the world engage in. Another lady appeared, a brunette, one of those fiery brunettes found perhaps only in the East. Above her forehead and temples rose a thick black mane, like a coronet woven from the gloom of night, of medium height, with a slender waist and a full bosom. She moved with a supple gait and a provocatively cheerful, yet lazily nonchalant air, like a beautiful conqueror of hearts. "That one is lovely," remarked Mariolle. "I can introduce you any time," replied Lucerie. "Who is she?" "The Comtesse Moscowa, a Romanian." "Strange," continued Mariolle. "I've never been particularly drawn to brunettes." "Really? Why not?" "I don't know. Perhaps the right one never came along. And besides, I prefer brunettes and blondes." "Oh, they're all dyed, those blondes." "Oh no, my dear fellow. Indeed they are dyed, my friend. Or at the very least, there are so many of them, and they dye their hair so artfully that one cannot tell them from the real article, and even experts are often mistaken. Finding a real blonde is as difficult as buying an artistic curio without finding it's a fake. One never knows for certain whom one is embracing." "Oh no, not at all. There is a charm in blondes that you won't find in brunettes. The nape of the neck, for instance. What can be more beautiful than that light down of the first short hairs, golden or chestnut, shimmering like mahogany, against the white skin of the neck, as it slopes gently into the shoulder? In brunettes, there is a certain harshness. They are like warrior women of love. Look at this one. She resembles an Amazon of coquetry. Remember Henriette's leisurely walk and her tender poses? Only too well. She knew her trade admirably." After a moment's thought, Mariolle added, "And yet, if she had been a little less vile, or a little more base, we might have made an inseparable pair." Several men, noticing them, approached with outstretched hands. The air was filled with, "Good evening, Mariolle. Bah! You here? How are you? When did you arrive? So even you, it seems, occasionally leave Paris." Mariolle shook hands right and left, replying with a smile that he was in excellent health, and had come to Aix to amuse himself. One of the interlocutors, the Marquis di Pimpernelli, a noble but impoverished Italian, a perpetual wanderer of the spas, asked him, "Are you acquainted with the Princess de Guerche?" "Yes. I sometimes hunt at her estate and have even dined there on occasion." "Well then, go and speak with her. She will invite you to join our excursion tomorrow." The princess was a small, thin woman, almost always dressed in a manner akin to masculine style. She wore closely fitted woolen jackets and skirts that did not impede movement, practical for a woman fond of walking, hunting, and riding. The princess was conversing with Mrs. Fields. Around them, clustered like a squad of bodyguards, was a circle of men. Seeing Mariolle, the princess amiably extended her hand to him. "Ah, good evening, Monsieur Mariolle," she said. "So you are in Aix too?" She immediately introduced him to the beautiful American, whose clear face, framed by golden hair, was illuminated by a constant smile. This was not the soft waves that crown the heads of some English beauties, but a radiant, sunlit mass, resembling a harvest ripened on virgin soil. Mrs. Fields's fame resounded throughout the capitals of the world. They fell into conversation. The princess never gambled. She came to the casino merely as a spectator. In the autumn, while fox hunting, she had caught rheumatism and was undergoing a serious course of treatment in Aix. Of noble birth, surrounded by a select society, she carried her passion for horses and sport to an extreme. Nothing in the world, apart from these, occupied, interested, or excited her. She was about 30 years old, with a plain but attractive, slightly boyish appearance, gentle and yet spirited blue eyes, and beautiful chestnut hair. Thin, supple, elegant, and muscular, she rode as well as any man, galloped through forests, hunted game, organized festivities, arranged fireworks, and seemed to give no thought to romance. The princess's husband, a deputy for a constituency in Turin where he had a magnificent estate, gave his wife complete freedom and devoted himself almost exclusively to historical research. He had twice been honored with prizes by the French Academy. References to the collection of manuscripts he had assembled were found in the works of scholars from all European countries. "Have you come for the cure?" the princess inquired of Mariolle. "No, princess." "So, for amusement?" "Exclusively for that." "All the better. Would you care to join our excursion to La Chambot tomorrow?" "With the greatest of pleasure." "Very well. Be at the Hotel de Royce tomorrow at 10 o'clock, after your morning treatments. That is our meeting point." Mariolle thanked the princess, delighted by the invitation, which opened a path for him into the very circle he was only just beginning to enter. They were joined by the diminutive Marquise d'Epelady and the stately Lady Wormsley, that professional beauty. They had previously been strolling among the gaming tables, occasionally risking a few louis d'or through the agency of one of their cavaliers. And all the ladies began discussing the company surrounding them, focusing chiefly on the courtesans. The men named them, supplied various details in hushed tones, and whispered about scandalous episodes. A story concerning Rosalie Durand amused everyone greatly, though Count de Lucue's tale about the latest exploit of the elder Delabarb's sister the previous evening at the hotel was deemed a trifle too risque, despite all the narrator's skill. The princess, mindful of her health, suddenly observed, "It is growing late. Let us go and have a cup of tea and then retire." She rose and, surrounded by her retinue, proceeded to the long glass gallery situated between the two parks, where fountains played by day and fireworks glittered in the evenings. The gallery served as a spacious cafe restaurant where those irritated by the communal table in the hotels and who were unconstrained by expense took their breakfast and supper. Over cups of steaming tea, the tone and substance of the conversation changed abruptly. The interlocutors seemed to return to an interrupted, effortless social discourse, familiar, eternally renewable, hinting at the existence of a peculiar Masonic union to which all these women of such diverse origins, all these men, representatives of various nations, belonged, united as a single, supreme, and supranational class. Around them swarmed the crowd, vulgar, commonplace, bustling, a crowd of ordinary people, even if wealthy or famous. But they no longer blended with it. They took no interest in it. They did not notice it. Imperceptibly, they had separated themselves from it, and, seated around the restaurant table, formed a closed circle, as if they were in an aristocratic drawing room. Now they conversed about people of their own circle, about those absent, about French, Russian, Italian, English, German individuals. It seemed they knew them as intimately as brothers or next-door neighbors, for the names that flashed through the conversation, mostly unfamiliar to Mariolle, were evidently well known to all the others. He listened to this talk with curiosity. The milieu surrounding him, this small tribe of aristocrats unbound by borders, this select international high society whose members recognized and found one another everywhere. In Paris, London, Vienna, St. Petersburg, was somewhat unfamiliar to him. This caste was founded on lineage, upbringing, traditions of refined luxury, a shared understanding of aristocratic life, marital alliances, and, most of all, reinforced by court connections and the friendly relations between monarchs, which elevated its members above the vulgar prejudice of nationality. Only a slight accent, distinguishing the speech of some interlocutors, betrayed that the language they used in any given city had been acquired by them in different countries. The princess and Mariolle, who sat beside her, soon detached themselves from the general conversation and moved to another topic. Wishing to please the princess, Mariolle began to praise the hunts on her estate, her outstanding skills in horsemanship, her indefatigability in the hunting field. His words touched her most sensitive chord, and a particular benevolence appeared in her eyes and voice, the kind that emerges in passionate natures when a listener flatters their obsession. Then they began to speak of travels, of the sea, the mountains, the Alps. They spoke especially highly of the environs of Aix. "Tomorrow's excursion will be delightful," said the princess. "I shall not describe it. You will see for yourself." Then, as a sign that Mariolle had managed to win her favor, she added, "You know what? Ride in my carriage tomorrow. Besides you, there will be another charming woman, the Romanian Comtesse Moscowa. She was in the gaming hall just now, was she not?" clarified Mariolle. "Yes, her father was with her, a tall old man with a mustache and a gray beard." The princess relayed to him some details of this young woman's life, who attracted universal attention in Aix with her beauty. She was the widow of Count Moscowa, a royal equerry killed in a duel over a card game quarrel. It had happened only a year and a half ago. Since then, the countess had traveled incessantly. It was rumored she had left Bucharest to recover from a profound grief. "And has she recovered?" inquired Mariolle with slight irony. "It seems so," the princess answered with a smile. Then she rose. Her curative regimen demanded adherence to a schedule. After her departure, Mariolle also left the casino. He felt a desire to stroll in the park before retiring. The time spent in the company of these elegant women had invigorated, cheered, and comforted him. He felt distinctly how, among these amiable people, the remnants of his sorrow were evaporating, and he began to ponder them, as one often does after meeting interesting and scarcely familiar individuals. For a long time, he wandered the park avenues on that hot, sultry night, one of those nights that in the summer months transform this town, lost deep in its valley, into a veritable steam bath. But as the images of the women with whom he had so recently sat faded in his mind, the feeling of loneliness seized him once more, the feeling that awoke every evening since his break with Henriette. No one awaited him in the bedroom anymore, and the darkness seemed boundless, the earth deserted. He felt both a vague need for a woman's love and a clear craving for the caresses that hold sway over men who have long lived in intimate closeness with one woman. As he had told Count de Lucery, until evening he was saved by morning vigor, that feeling akin to a vague hope, which awakens daily in the heart, and then by life's bustle, its distractions, its minor cares. But every evening, at the same hour, the crisis returned, and in it mingled memories, desires, antipathy, and the rekindled anger against that wretched woman for whom he had suffered so much and suffered still. Nevertheless, he congratulated himself on having broken with her, and, as if to fortify his spirit, repeated, "Damn it all, how good it is that this is over." Without haste, he returned to the hotel, went up to his room, lay down, and fell asleep almost instantly, weary from the journey and the day's impressions. Robert Mariolle woke early. The morning bustle beginning in the hotel had roused him. He was drawn from his bed by the commotion, and sunlight streamed through the window panes in such a powerful flood that the room with its light walls and white curtains resembled a bowl overflowing with dazzling radiance. Mariolle could not resist and got up. Once dressed, he left his room and proceeded along the narrow corridor where, lined up before the doors like sentinels, stood brilliantly polished slippers, shoes, and boots. These leather articles, some elegant, some rather coarse, spoke eloquently of the lives, habits, degree of elegance, and social standing of those who still rested behind the walls. Mariolle, in his morning vigor and elevated mood, smiled as he reflected on this. A pair of elegant slippers, standing alone by a threshold, stirred in him a fleeting desire to knock on that door, while he passed by heavy, hobnailed soles with mild contempt, imagining behind the panels the snore of some itinerant tourist. Suddenly his attention was caught by something like a chest, concealed by curtains and occupying almost the entire width of the corridor. This box was being carried by two breathless Savoyards. For a moment, he fancied that a misfortune had occurred. His heart lurched as if he had encountered a funeral bier in the street. But then he remembered he was at a spa, where some invalids were transported directly from their beds to their prescribed baths, and then back again. Twice more he had to pause on the staircase to let similar litters pass, and he understood completely whence and whither they were being carried. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this, don't lose sight of the channel, subscribe. And, of course, feel free. Your comments and discussions are most welcome.